office, and as soon as we get the, okay. So today we're going to talk about the purchase agreement. We're not going to go through the entire agreement page by page. In talking to Morgan, what she really wanted me to do is going to go into a deep dive of those approximately 13 key issues of the purchase agreement. I think most of you are CVAR members, so I will be doing a webinar at 10 o'clock on Monday. It's free for all CVAR members. Just contact Nancy Oakley at CVAR or just go onto the CVAR website and you can log in, register for the class. They'll give you an access link, and Monday at 10 o'clock you can log in and you can see a complete program, 3 hours on the purchase agreement. If you're a member of Arcadia, I'm going to be doing a class for them tomorrow from 9 to 12. So those are two options. I also sent a link to Morgan, and she can send it to you, of an earlier class I did for Tri-Counties. For whatever reason, they don't protect their link, so you don't have to be a member of Tri-Counties to watch it. But she can send you the link on that, so you can see the whole thing. You do need to know this contract. You cannot do this business without knowing that contract. It's one of those things, you can get through the real estate business without doing the buyer representation agreement, although you really should use it, but you can survive without that. You can fumble around not understanding the listing agreement, because really the worst thing that could happen with the listing agreement is you won't get your commission. But if you screw up the purchase agreement, you're going to get sued. And that's going to cost you a lot of money. And your broker's going to be very unhappy with you. So you need to know the purchase agreement. So what I'd like to do as we go through is, I can work my clicker here. We've got a lot of technology going on. Well, we can do it the old... Uh-oh, did I lose my... Hold on. There we go. Top issues. So you all have the handout. So just as kind of a preview, these are the points that I'm going to be talking about as we go through. I think it's probably a little easier. Morgan, this screen went blank. Is that a bad thing? If you're trying to record me? Okay.
Hopefully
you're good. So these are the areas that we're going to go through today. If you have any other questions on the purchase agreement, you've got me for 2 hours. So everything is fair game. I will do my best to answer them. I do not work for CAR. Okay? I'm a realtor. I'm a member of CAR, but I'm not employed by them. I don't serve them or anything like that. I am a full-time professor at Mount SAC, but I do enjoy doing real estate classes to professionals because I learn a lot from the questions that you have as we go through. So anyway, these will be the top issues. But the first thing I'd like to talk about as we get into the first page, and then that second paragraph, agency, is talk a little bit about agency disclosure and the PRBS, or potential representation of more than one buyer or seller. Now, when I say the word agency, I can just see the eyes roll in your head. You're saying, oh gosh, agency. Don't I have to take that class every 4 years to renew my license? Yes, you do. But that agency disclosure form is a document that is not used as effectively as it should be. So with sellers, it's never a problem, because I know you always get that AD form signed when you take the listing. And you have to get it signed before you take the listing, because as soon as you and your seller sign the listing agreement, you're in an agency relationship. And Civil Code 2079 is very clear. You cannot legally enter into an agency relationship with a buyer or seller until you first disclose the difference between single and dual agency to them. It's right there in the Civil Code. So, seller's the easy part, because we all know we always do that AD form before we take the listing. Buyers is a little bit difficult, because when do you normally get that agency disclosure form signed by the buyer? Right before you write the offer, which is the absolute last opportunity you can get that form signed and still be under the law. However, for the preceding week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it took, that you are out working with that buyer, did you start to think of that buyer as your client? Yes. Could that buyer have thought of you as their agent? Yes. Well, if you're thinking that, you're supposed to get that agency disclosure form signed. True story. as I was talking with Morgan earlier, years ago I managed a branch office for a very large company. In our building alone, our office, we probably had about 400 agents. It was a big office. We were averaging 6 or 7 closings a day. I mean, it was that big. So Monday morning was always a disaster for me because I would get these calls coming in. And one call, which is one of my favorites, was from another agent in another office. Calls us up, says one of our agents stole his buyer. He's going to sue us, take us before the ethics board. I go, okay. What happened? He said, well, he stole my client. Okay, let me talk to my agent, and I'll get back to you. So I call up our agent, and it hasn't happened the day before or 2 days before, over the weekend. She was hosting one of her listings as an open house. A buyer came in. She asked him, are you working with another agent? And he said, no, I've seen properties with other agents, but I do not have an agent. So she wrote an offer on her own listing, double-ending the deal. Hooray for her, right? Now I got to call this other agent back. So I called the other agent back, and the first thing I asked him is, do you have a buyer-broker agreement, a buyer representation agreement with that buyer? Because I know if he had one of those signed, we were dead. And he didn't. And I figured he didn't because nobody ever uses it, right? Mm-hmm. Then I asked, could you please, and he says, I'm still going to sue you. I don't need one of those. Okay. So would you please send me a copy of your agency disclosure form signed by the buyer? Well, I don't have one of those. I go, ha, you lose. Because Civil Code 2079 says that before you can claim somebody as your client, before you can be somebody's agent, you have to disclose agency to them on the AD form. And the penalty in 2079.14 is loss of commission. So you lose again. Go away. And he did. Now, had he had one of those AD forms signed, I would have had to go to Plan B, and I don't have a Plan B. But I know when you guys get that AD signed, right before you write the offer. So I'm suggesting today, get the AD form signed before you start showing the buyer property. And it's a very easy script. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, look forward to working with you. Before we go out and start looking at properties, Civil Code requires that I explain the difference between single and dual agency. That's what this form does. It is merely a disclosure. It creates no contractual obligations, but the law requires I disclose the difference between single and dual agency. Single agency, our company will only represent you. Dual agency, if you choose to write an offer on a listing that we have. Sign the form, you're good, you got the AD form signed, right? The next form is that PRBS, potential representation of buyer and seller. Now, the AD form is required by statute. The PRBS form is required by the contract. So you do have to do the PRBS form as well. What the PRBS form does is two things. It says that if you are working with two buyers that are essentially looking for the same house, it's okay. Or if you represent two sellers who essentially have the same property because they're 3 doors down from each other in a tract and they have the same model, that's okay. But the bigger thing that the PRBS does is it says that if I have a buyer who's ready to write an offer, and it just happens to be on one of our company's listings, meaning we have to go into dual agency, the buyer is agreeing to go into dual agency. Or the seller, if they get an offer from somebody in your company, they are agreeing to go into dual agency if they have to. You see, you don't want to be in a situation where you're ready to write an offer for your buyer on somebody's listing in your company, only to have the buyer say, wait a minute, you want me to go into dual agency? I read something on the internet that says dual agency is bad. No, I want to stay in single agency. Now what do you do? I guess you have to refer it to a different brokerage company, right? You can't represent that buyer, because if you represent that buyer, you have to be in dual agency because the property they want to buy is a listing in your company, right? To avoid being in that situation, the PRBS says the parties agree to go to dual agency if they have to. So when do you need that PRBS signed? Well, with the seller, when you take the listing. With the buyer, before you start showing them properties. When do I see a lot of agents getting that PRBS signed? In escrow. What good does it do you? None. But I got to get it signed because my broker won't pay me my commission unless the file is complete. But the form doesn't do you any good, right? So since you have to do these darn forms anyway, you want to get them done so that they protect you, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the AD form. That's the PRBS form. Sorry about starting on my soapbox, but I'm a big fan of disclosure, a big fan of protecting you, but if the form can't protect you unless you get it done on the right time or the right way, all right? So the next area I want to go to is paragraph 3E3, which is right here, occupancy type. Now, the nice thing about this new form is that all the negotiating points are in paragraph 3. The only thing that is negotiable that is not in paragraph 3 is a liquidated damages clause and the arbitration clause. Those have to be initialed in, right? But everything else that's going to be negotiated between the parties is all found in paragraph 3. Having said that, don't stop reading at paragraph 3, all right? Because the explanation of these terms is found in the remaining 13 pages. So, if you want to subject yourself to the class at CVAR, and again, the only reason I'm publicizing it, because most of you are members of CVAR, and it's free. I don't get paid for it. I volunteer for the association. But I spend an hour and a half talking about paragraph 3. And I spend the remaining 90 minutes talking about the last 13 pages, because all the meat is really in paragraph 3. But getting here to occupancy type, we're asked to check whether it is primary. Well, that's the default language, that it is primary, or it is secondary, or it is investment. So I realize I'm a bit talking to the choir because this is a RE/MAX office. RE/MAX agents are, by nature, more experienced, okay? Do greater sales volume. We all know that because of the nature of the model of RE/MAX. But just as a reminder, if your buyer is purchasing a secondary home, that's going to be picked up by the lender, and they may have a little bit of a higher interest rate. Down payment typically is not affected by that, but if it's an investment property, your down payment is going to be significantly more because the property needs to pencil out from cash flow wise, and that may require as much as a 40% down. So if you're primarily personal residences and you stretch out into somebody who wants to buy a house or something else, and you're going to use it for an investment property, lenders are going to require it to pencil out, and again, that's going to be maybe 40% down, because that's the only way you can get that loan payment low enough so that the rents more than cover the amount of expenses. Okay, the next area I want to talk to, and this is a huge one, paragraph 3, where are we? H1, H2, and H3. Verification of cash, down payment, closing costs, and loan cash status. Now, in the old contract, if you had a cash offer, you were supposed to accompany the offer with proof of the money. If you didn't accompany it, then you're supposed to check the box. You had 3 days to do it. However, on the second page, that was on the first page of the old contract. On the second page, the verification of down payment and closing costs and the pre-qualification or pre-approval letter were not to accompany the offer unless you check the box that it did. In other words, the cash followed a different rule than the down payment and the loan. It was really confusing because everybody kept confusing those two. So what they've done in this contract is they've made them the same. So what this contract says is If you have an all-cash offer, you will accompany proof of funds with the offer. If you're getting a loan, you will accompany proof of down payment and closing costs with the offer. Okay? You will also include with the offer your pre-qualification or pre-approval letter. If you don't have the documentation, then you check the box and you will do it within 3 days. And remember, all days are calendar days. The only time we look at business days is the amount of time for the buyer to deliver the deposit to Legacy First Escrow, right? Why? Because Legacy First Escrow is not open on non-business days. So that's why we use business days to get the deposit to escrow. Everywhere else in the contract, we always use calendar days. Now, at the end of this series, I will get into counting days and how we do that, because that's a new clarification of the contract. But we're using calendar days, all right? So, verification of all cash with the offer, verification of down payment and closing costs with the offer, and the verification of loan application with the offer. And if you don't have that, then you check the box, and you have 3 calendar days to deliver it. All right? The new point here that I want to emphasize is here in the 5th column, we have 3 boxes: pre-qualification, pre-approval, and this new category, fully underwritten pre-approval. So what do these terms mean? Well, they're not defined. I wish CIR would define them, but I guess the Standard Forms Committee couldn't figure out how to define them. I can tell you my definition, which actually coincides with CIR's definition. Every now and then CIR and I agree. That's a good thing, right? Pre-qualification to me means that the buyer has had some kind of a conversation with the lender. The lender took a verbal on their income, on their debt, on how much money they have, and ran their credit. And we're assuming the buyer is truthful. And if the buyer is truthful, then that pre-qualification is pretty good. But what do we know about buyers? They're not always truthful. That's why I say, hold on, buyers are liars sometimes, right? So pre-qualification letter, it's okay, not great. Pre-approval, okay? Pre-approval for me is that the lender has actually gotten the 2 years of tax returns, has seen their pay stubs, has seen their bank statements, has, sees their bills, okay? That's pre-approval, okay? Better, but not perfect. This last category, and this is the big one, and I'm not sure where lenders are on this. Lenders I've talked to said, oh yeah, we're up on it. I'm not always sure on that, but fully underwritten pre-approval. That means the loan has been approved. This buyer qualifies for the loan. There is nothing more we need from this buyer. They are fully approved. We're ready to fund the loan for this buyer. The only thing we're missing is the appraisal. Okay, so why did CIR come up with this? So that a buyer who needs to get a loan, they can get this fully underwritten pre-approval, and now they can compete with a cash buyer. Because a cash buyer also has an appraisal contingency, right? They also have an investigation contingency. So the thinking from CIR is we want to put this buyer who needs financing on the same level that they can compete against a cash buyer. So that's this fully underwritten pre-approval, okay? So when you're talking to your lenders, that's really what you want, particularly if you're going to be competing against other offers. Some of those buyers may be coming in with cash. All right. Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
I'm guessing that probably no one's ever going to check the first box because they probably don't want to tell you that it's just the verbal. What's the best way to verify it?
Well, actually, I think some aren't going to check any box. They're going to slide it through. In the contract, paragraph 5C, I think it is, we have a new section allows the seller's agent to verify the buyer's loan status with the buyer's lender. So with that pre-approval, pre-qualification, fully underwritten, whatever it is, you're going to have a letter from the buyer's lender. The offer says that the listing agent, the representative of the seller, can verify the buyer's loan as well as the loan status. So if you're representing the seller, call the lender up and say, tell me about the buyer. Where are they? What do you got? You see what they say. Okay.
What are your suggestions as far as is it okay to ask for a DU or required?
Ask for what?
Is it okay to ask for DU finding?
What does DU mean?
Direct underwriting.
Yeah, but what does it mean?
Without that.
But what does it mean? It's the method the lender uses to determine the qualification, basically, right? So does it really matter what process the lender uses? See, I get that DU. All I want to know is, will the lender approve the loan? Is the loan approved? And whether they do it through DU or whether they do it through a Ouija board, it don't matter to me. It's kind of like credit scores. Agents, well, I want to know what the buyer's credit score is. Well, what the heck do you know about credit scores? And you're going to get one score. We all know there's three. Well, actually, there's more than that. And they pick the middle one, right? It doesn't help you. I mean, the lender is going to make the determination on whether or not they're going to do that loan, and they're going to make that in conjunction with ratios, assets, and credit score, right? And we don't want to get into that. What we really want is we want verification from the lender that, yes, they can do the loan, or where they are on that loan approval circuit, right? Because, it always bothers me. It's kind of like, and there are still some dinosaur agents out there from the Paleozoic era who are asking for a copy of the deposit check. We haven't used deposit checks for 15 years. The buyer delivers the check directly to escrow so that your brokerage does not have to take a receipt of a trust fund, right? For the last 3 years, DRE has received 0 complaints of trust fund mishandling in sales transactions. 0. Now, property management transactions, they have a slew of them, but none in sales. Why? Because the buyer delivers the check or the deposit, now electronically. There's not even a place for a check in this contract. It's all to be delivered electronically. But what do agents still ask for? Copy of the check. Get with the times, right? So that's my thing on, verify the loan status. See where the loan is. But, how the lender is going to approve the loan, it's not really going to help you a whole lot. I don't think. Challenge me if I'm wrong. But that's where I want. Okay, so we good on this fully underwritten pre-approval, right? Okay, so the next item I want to talk about is this assignment request. Now, in the old contract, it prohibited assignments without seller's approval. In the contract before then, it didn't say anything about it, which means the contract was assignable. California law states is, unless there is a prohibition of assignment, then contracts are assignable. Right? So CAR contracts prohibit assignment, but it also says that the seller's denial, or the seller will not unreasonably deny the assignment. What are the mechanics of the assignment? Well, first of all, if the buyer wants to assign their rights under the contract. So I enter a contract with this gentleman here, but I decide I'm going to assign my rights to this gentleman over here. Okay? I have to request his approval within 17 days of acceptance. If I wait until the 18th day, his denial is not unreasonable. That's what the contract says. During the first 17 days, he cannot deny it unreasonably. After 17 days, his denial is not unreasonable, and he doesn't even have to give a reason. So if I want to assign my rights, I got to do it in the first 17 days. Right? It also says that if this gentleman here is paying me for that assignment, in other words, I'm tying up properties and then I'm trying to sell my position to somebody else and make some money. Some people like to call that warehousing. I have to tell the seller how much he's paying me. I got to tell what I'm making. The contract says. All right. Last point. If I'm assigning my position into my living trust or a corporation or an LLC where I am the owner, only owner, that does not require seller's approval. Because basically I'm just assigning it to myself in a different name. We call that an alter ego. Okay? But that's the rule on assignment. So if you do have a buyer who is assigning, they need to make that request within the first 17 days. And if they're being paid to transfer that contract over, you've got to tell the seller how much they're being paid. Right? Yes, ma'am.
So when we get an offer like this and we represent the seller, we can counter back no assignments in the counter offer, correct?
The seller does not have to approve the assignment. It's just that the approval cannot be unreasonably denied. If you assign, that person steps into your shoes. So if I've released all my contingencies, the assignee has no contingencies on the contract. So they take in your shoes. So I guess the question is, why doesn't the seller want to do the assignment? Is there a reason there? Okay. If this person is not qualified, that's reason to deny the assignment. But yes, you could put in a counteroffer, no assignment, but I would ask why. I mean, I think you might just be muddying the water for no reason. That's just kind of my perspective.
So, because I was always told, in different companies that I worked with, we do not accept that. We want to sell it to the person who's actually on the contract.
Okay.
So,
If they have a reason, okay, but I've always worried about prohibitions of assignment because we've often seen that used to avoid fair housing laws. I'll sell it to a white person, but I won't sell it to a person of color. You got to be careful there where you say absolutely no assignment. So I think what CIR's tried to do is say, look, if you want to assign your rights, you have to request it from the seller. The seller will not deny the assignment unreasonably, whatever that means.
but couldn't it be a domino theory where, okay, say the person that's actually on here is
Buyer one.
buyer one, okay, but then they're assigning it to somebody else, and that somebody else for some reason laid down or didn't happen, or
You can hold buyer one still responsible.
and buyer two does not have any responsibility?
Actually, they both be responsible. You can put them both on the hook. You can put them both on the hook.
But wouldn't that just tie property up? I mean,
Yeah.
Well, again, you've got your 17 days, and they have to release all contingencies in 17 days, or you cancel and you go back on the market. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on the LA market, I have experienced a lot of investors that they send you offers, and they just to cut out the property like they're saying. And then if they don't resell it to somebody else on the period 15 or 17 days, then they just cancel. And you just wasted like 2 weeks, which is really you could have sold it to somebody else.
Yes.
Well, again, you can write the contract tighter with shortening contingencies. I mean, you can contact the buyer's lender to find out what their loan status is. If a person is engaging in what we call warehousing, they probably don't have that fully underwritten pre-approval. They don't have pre-approval, okay?
A lot of these are LLCs. They send you like statements like $3 million, $2 million. I mean, it's just like out of numbers that out of
Okay. I mean, again, every situation is unique,
Yeah.
and we are in a crazy market.
Right.
We are in a crazy market. There's another hand over here, I thought. No? Okay. Moving on. Okay, so hopefully you understand assignment. Again, I didn't write this contract. I'm just explaining it. Okay? But that's where you are on it. Remember, if there's an assignment request, first 17 days, seller will not unreasonably deny the assignment. If the seller thinks that this person is warehousing, they say, okay, how much are you getting for this? And if it doesn't smell right, say, no, I'm not going to approve the assignment. And that would not be considered unreasonable because they don't want to participate in a warehouse operation.
So for the assignment to occur, then they would have to write it in here. They couldn't leave the whole thing blank and then tell us, oh, we're going to assign it to buyer number 2.
Okay.
They have to write in so many days?
No, it says right here 17 days.
Right.
They must make the request in 17
Oh,
days.
they make it in 17.
If you go to paragraph 23, and that's, okay, just to orient yourself with the way this paragraph 3 is working, on the far left-hand side is the name of this line, paragraph 3H3. If you want to know more about what this means, you can go to paragraph 6B where it's explained. You see, the paragraph 3, this grid, basically just is the boxes to check. It's the negotiation. What that means, if you include a box or that line means, is explained later in the paragraph identified in the second column. Right? Now, it didn't work for me last time I tried, but supposedly, if you take your cursor and you hover over any of the paragraphs identified in the second column, you will see a pop-up later in the contract of that particular paragraph. And if you were to click, let's say 23 here, just to the right of K, it will take you to paragraph 23. And in paragraph 23, you will see a reference to paragraph 3K. And if you click on that, it'll bring you back. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. It hasn't worked very well for me, but CAR is still trying to get the bugs out of it. So just remember, this is an interactive contract. And the meaning of everything we're talking about here in the grid in paragraph 3 is explained further in the document. So you need to click on that and find out what it says, or ask me. But I'm only going to be here for another hour and a half.
Let me ask one more
Yes,
quick
sir.
question. Just to make
Okay.
sure. So we have buyer number 1. So let's say buyer number 1 offers like 600. The house is 600.
Okay.
But then he goes ahead and signs it for like 630.
So the buyer is making an overpriced offer.
No, the buyer's paying 600.
Okay.
Buyer number 2, where he's going to now
Assign
assign
it.
it, is going to be for 630.
Okay.
Now we're going to have to notify the seller. What do you think the seller's going to say? We're going to be in trouble. The seller's going to say, oh my God, you sold it too cheap.
Yes.
630 over here. Do I get that other 30,000?
No,
I'm saying no.
I'm not going to approve this assignment. I think this is unreasonable. I've sold it too cheap.
Oh, the seller cannot, then this not.
He
approve
may
the
say
assignment.
this is not
Oh.
reasonable,
Oh, okay, all right.
right? As long as the seller has a reasonable reason, and say, my gosh, I've sold it too cheap. No, unless you want to give me some money.
Okay.
And the seller can say, okay, you want me to approve this assignment? I'm not comfortable you making $30,000. You give me another 15 or 20 and I'll let you assign it.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
I mean, I think what CIR is trying to do here is create a little bit more transparency and stop the gouging. Okay? And we all know, I mean, prices right now, I mean, who can tell me what a property is worth today, right? You'll be a richest man in the room, a richest woman in the room if you can tell me what a property truly is worth today. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's going to quiet down, which is the way we're going to not like it then either. This is like my fourth market change, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think, to me, this is personal. I think what they should have done, they should have checked in that if it was going to be assigned for them to check. That way, people know in advance that it could be assigned or not.
Well, the contract says it may be assigned, okay? This box here, oops.
There you go.
Okay, this box here is if you want to shorten or extend the amount of time that the buyer can request an assignment. And the reason they did 17 days is that is the contingency release period. Okay? But, I mean, it's in the contract. You know, if you don't like it, write CAR. It's not my fault. I didn't write it. I'm just trying to figure it out. Yes, ma'am.
So either way, we would end up writing in the counter offer, we can say, okay, assignment request 1 day. So we could know immediately.
You could counter assignment request, 1 day's a little, I'd say 5 days. I mean, make it reasonable, but
Well,
3 days?
Because this is really, this is putting us at jeopardy as listing agents. This is not.
It's not really, no, it's up to the seller to decide. You just need to explain to the seller what is being asked. And then it's up to the seller to decide what they want to do. Try not,
Sharks out there.
what?
Like this gentleman said, I mean, I've worked with a lot of agents that, and a lot of investors that, I mean, this is not.
I know. Most of you were not born when I got my real estate license. Okay, I am that old. I'm an SOB, son of broker. It was, graduated from high school, got a real estate license. That's the way it worked in my family. Okay, I know. There have been sharks in this business forever. And a market like this brings out the worst. It does. Okay. Let me move on. I'll hang around here and send you a second bill for extra time, but I need to move through the contract, okay? Kidding, kind of. Okay, contingencies, okay? One of the nice things about this contract is they finally put all the contingencies in one spot and they listed them out so you know what they are. One of the problems in previous contracts is whenever CAR had a new paragraph, they'd shoehorn it in someplace. And you could never find anything. The other nice thing about this contract is that if you look in that second column, everything here is in the same order in paragraph 8. So you want to figure out what one of these things really means. You go into paragraph 8 and they're in the same order. And they're titled the same. So it's really easy to navigate through. So there's a couple things I want to talk about of this contingency paragraph. First of all, only the loan and the appraisal can be released with the offer. If you want to release any of the other contingencies, you have to include the contingency release form. But you can release the loan contingency and the appraisal contingency simply by checking the two top boxes in the first two paragraphs. The first one is loan, the second one is appraisal, the third one is investigation of the property. Now, one of the challenges here is that we confuse those three. They are separate and distinct. Let me give you an example. The loan contingency relates solely to the buyer's ability to qualify for the loan. In other words, afford the loan, and their risk of default is not as high, so high as the lender's not going to approve the loan. Okay? That's the loan contingency. The appraisal contingency has to do with the value of the house. Okay? Does the house value meet the price being paid? That's the appraisal contingency. The investigation contingency talks about the other things. For example, your lender is going to require hazard insurance, fire insurance, right? Well, let's say this seller has made multiple claims and you can't get insurance for the house because of all the claims that the seller has filed, right? That's where we get that clue report, right? That's an investigation contingency. That's not a loan contingency, all right? So be careful when you're releasing contingencies that you don't release a contingency thinking it does something else. Loan is simply, does the buyer make enough money? Does the buyer have enough credit? Does the buyer have enough assets to qualify for the loan? Appraisal contingency, the value of the house. Investigation contingency are the other things, all right? Yes, ma'am.
So without a fire insurance being so outrageous and high in the hills, would it be an investigation?
Yes, that's investigation contingency. Okay, that's investigation contingency. That's not loan contingency. Person can qualify for the loan, except the property is not insurable. That's investigation. All right, and the contract actually says that in paragraph 8C and in paragraph 12. Okay, it actually states that in there. So be careful with releasing contingencies. The other thing about releasing contingencies. So let's say you're representing the seller and you get a non-contingent offer. And the seller says, great. And you mistakenly say, yeah, the buyer's going to have to buy it. They can't back out. Yes, they can. Because when the buyer gets the TDS, they have a statutory 3-day right by personal delivery or 5-day right by mail, snail mail, email, doesn't matter, to cancel. That's in the Civil Code 1102. You cannot contract out a statutory right. Wouldn't it be nice if we put in our contracts with an addendum that the buyer and seller agree never to sue us? Be nice, it won't work, because they have a statutory right to sue us if we stub our toe, right? So you will always have an right to cancel upon delivery of a statutory disclosure. That's not a contingency, that's a statutory right. But when you're representing your buyer, be careful. If they're going to write an uncontingent offer, say, oh, don't worry, if you don't like it, you can always cancel with the TDS. Oops, the seller doesn't have to give a TDS. So what happened to your statutory right? It doesn't exist, right? Because the statutory right only exists if the seller has to give a TDS. And when you're representing the buyer, you don't necessarily know what obligations this particular seller has or doesn't have. So just be careful that you don't say the wrong thing when it comes to contingencies and statutory obligations and right to cancel. Yes, ma'am.
Now, I have a property that's like Long Beach, and I got multiple offers, and I got one offer that was all cash. Of course, I want to know what contingencies does the seller have? Because they did a bait and switch on us. Now that we picked their offer that was, all cash supposedly, no contingencies, they're getting an appraisal. I'm like, why are you doing an appraisal? Because it's their right, to get an appraisal.
Okay, now you said no contingencies. Appraisal is a contingency unless they released it. Did they release the appraisal contingency?
They did write the contingency, no, they did not.
So they still have an appraisal contingency. So even a cash offer has an appraisal contingency. In order for the in order for the contingencies not to exist, you need to release L3 through L7 with a contingency removal form. You can also use that to release the loan and appraisal contingency, or you can just release the appraisal and loan contingency with the offer.
With the separate form.
No.
Attached to the
Okay.
offer.
The separate form for release of investigation, review of documents, preliminary title, combination subdivision, lease and lien systems. You can release loan and appraisal by checking these boxes here in column 5. Those are the only contingencies you can release with the offer. If you want to release the other 7 contingencies, you have to add the contingency removal form. So you need to be real careful when you're representing a seller on what contingencies are being released and what are not. If it's an all-cash offer, there is no loan contingency. But all-cash offers do carry an appraisal contingency unless you release it. Okay.
Now, they're doing a loan all of a sudden, okay?
Which they can do, but they cannot use the inability to get a loan to back out. So if I write an all-cash offer and I decide to get a loan, I can't, okay? But I still have to close on time. And I can't say, we need a couple more days because the loan. Doesn't work because you're an all-cash offer. You don't have a loan contingency. Cash offers do not have loan contingencies, but they still have appraisal contingencies.
I thought we can cancel on breach of them doing the switch and bait on me and say, you know what, this is deceived, you deceived us.
You can't, because it doesn't matter to the seller as long as they get their money on time. That's where the court is going to go. See, as long as the seller gets their money on time, the seller hasn't been damaged, and you can't sue somebody unless you've suffered a damage. In other words, a financial loss. That's the way the courts are going to rule, okay? But it's tricky. I know that you're kind of saying, oh gosh, why do I come and listen to lawyers? I don't know, but you're here, okay? But that's the way the law works. Fortunately, unfortunately, okay? All right. What else do we need to know over here? Okay, so if you're familiar with auto warranties, this will make sense. If you never understood auto warranties, then this will not make sense. From delivery of the document, okay, the contingency period runs 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after receipt, whichever comes later. Okay? So, if I give you a disclosure late on the 10th day, okay, 10 plus 5 is 15. We're still within 17 days from acceptance. It's 17 days. If I give you as a seller a late disclosure on day 15, 15 plus 5 is day 20, okay, it's 20 days. So the amount of time the buyer has to release contingencies is 17 days from the date of acceptance or 5 days after receipt of a disclosure, whichever occurs later. So if you have a late disclosure on day 15, 5 plus 15 is day 20, the buyer's contingency period has been extended to day 20. All right? Just like an auto warranty, right? Just as frustrating to try to figure out. Yes, sir?
So date of acceptance, do you consider that day 0 or day 1?
Date of acceptance is always going to be day 0. And we'll talk about that when we get into the days. But whatever you do today is day 0. Tomorrow is always day 1. Okay?
And that applies towards contingencies.
Applies for everything because they're actually, and we'll get to it, counting days in the definitions. They actually talk about today as being day 0. Whether it's 6 in the morning or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, today is always day 0. Same thing with close of escrow, day 0. Tomorrow's old days 1. Yes, ma'am.
Does that include all disclosures?
I'm sorry, what?
Does that include all disclosures or specific disclosures?
All disclosures. All disclosures. Okay, okay, I'd say all disclosures that are material, if they would affect the value of the property. Arguably, a disclosure that does not affect the value of the property is not a material fact because, again, if it doesn't affect the value of the property, then the seller would have no damages. It has to financially impact the buyer, impact the buyer adversely. It's all about suing. If they have a financial loss, then they have damages. Damages is a fancy legal word for money. Right? You say the word damages to a lawyer, oh, money, 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 money. Where's the ambulance for me to chase, right? Okay. Any question on definitions? I'll move on through. Okay. All right. So my next item is possession, and oh gosh, this is crazy. Okay. So no change for basically time of possession, day of close of escrow, and you can wiggle that around as depending, time of recordation or 6 p.m. on the date of recordation or whatever. Okay. Then the next one, seller occupied or vacant units. Okay, so is the seller going to stay in the property after close of escrow? And you have 2 boxes here. The first box in column 3, you put in the number of days if it's 29 days or less. So you have to check the box and say how many days. Okay? Now, do we like seller staying in after close or escrow? No. But the only time in my 45 years, if I must say it, that I ever will encourage or offer the seller to stay after close of escrow, if my seller is in their 80s, because I might be able to get the property at a better price, or my offer becomes much more competitive, because at that stage, is it about money anymore? Not if they're in their 80s, it's about convenience, right? I'm going to spend it. They're in their 80s. So I might give them a little more time, like 3 days, right? That's supposed to be a joke. It always falls flat on them. Okay. 29 days. So if you check the first box, you put in the number of days, then the SIP form, seller in possession, will automatically attach to your file. If you go with the second box, which means you're going 30 days or longer, again, you put in the number of days, but then it'll attach the RLAS form, residential lease after sale. Now, they're both tenancies. You're creating a tenancy either way. It's just that if the seller is going to stay in for longer than 30 days, you kind of have a tenancy on steroids now, because you might want to have to address things like rent, security deposits, other things, right? So most lenders don't care if the seller's going to be in for 3 days after close. You still need to let them know. You need to let your insurance company know. If you're going to 29 days, they may not. But if it's over 30 days, you're probably going to have loan problems. You may have insurance problems, because that's going to look like an investment property, a rental property, even though they're both landlord-tenant situations that you're increasing. It's just if you're over 30 days, it's much more detailed. Okay? That's what they have there. Now, the big change here is M3, okay? Tenant-occupied units. So if you check this box, the TOPA form will attach. Now, you got two forms here. You have the TOP form, which is the secret form, and the TOPA form. The TOP form, the secret form, cannot be viewed on zip forms. The only time you will ever see the TOP form is if you're typing caricatures in a blank and you have too many caricatures for that blank, then it will automatically populate the TOP form. So it's like a hidden secret addendum form that will only show up if your caricatures exceed the space provided. Otherwise, you use the CAR addendum form, okay? That's the TOP form, so got rid of that. The TOPA form is kind of the new tenant in possession form. So under the old contract, if the buyer was going to occupy the property, the tenant had to be out 5 days prior to close of escrow, by 5 days. Well, that's when you do their verification of condition or the final walkthrough. You want the tenant out. Under this agreement, the TOPA form says that the tenant may remain in the property unless you check the box in the first paragraph. Then it says the tenant will be out 5 days prior to close of escrow. So seller will get the tenant out 5 days prior to close of escrow. However, and CAR had to make a call here. Are we going to go on the seller side? Are we going to go on the buyer side? And CAR went on the seller side. And the TOPA form says that if the tenant is not out, in other words, the seller cannot get the tenant out of the property, then the buyer agrees to either A, close escrow and waives all rights against the seller. In other words, they're going to buy the property with the tenant and release the seller for any damages. Or B, they are going to cancel. The seller will refund their deposit, even if they've initialed the liquidated damages clause and released all contingencies. The seller will refund the deposit. The seller will reimburse the buyer for their appraisal fees and all reasonable inspection fees. And the buyer releases the seller from any claim. So they went on the seller side there, recognizing that it is very difficult to get tenants out of properties. Okay, so that's the TOPA form. Now, some of you are saying is, well, can I change that? An attorney could change it. I have read the TOPA form. I have said, okay, how can we tweak this? It is really tightly written. If you don't like that, or your seller, the buyer doesn't like that, then I recommend you say, look, you need to talk to an attorney, because what you're trying to do is make a major alteration to this purchase agreement, and that's not something any of you want to do. That's not something I would want to do. But that TOPA form is tightly written, all right? But I wanted to draw your attention to it. Every now and then I get a question, how come O is left intentionally blank? The same reason I is left intentionally blank, because paragraph 3O looks a lot like number 30, and paragraph 3I looks a lot like 31. So to avoid 3O being confused with paragraph 30 and 3I being confused with paragraph 31, they just decided to eliminate 3O and 3I. And that's why you have this intentionally left blank there, okay? All right, moving on. So in paragraph 3N, delivery of seller documents, return escrow instructions, 5 days, delivery of seller documents, 7 days, time to pay HOA fees, order those, 3 days. That's all the same. There's something new on N4. The installation, smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detector, water heater bracing. Now, in the next section, we get into the costs, how costs are going to be allocated. Remember, costs are typically negotiable between buyer and seller. There's a couple things in the cost area that are pre-filled out. For example, the seller paying for the HOA documents that they're required under statute to give to buyer, that's a seller expense. If the lender requires a certification fee of how many units in a condo complex are owner-occupied or not, that's an expense of buyer. Okay? But pretty much everything else is negotiated between seller and buyer, as is the installation of smoke alarms, CO detectors, and water heater bracing. So who pays for it can be negotiated in the next section. But the fact that they have to be installed is an obligation of the seller. So what N4 says is the seller will install smoke alarms, CO detectors, and water heater bracing within 5 days after acceptance. Who pays for it can be negotiated, but it still needs to be there. And the thinking here was the law requires these items to be in place. As a matter of fact, if any of you have a house without a smoke alarm, that's a $100 fine, or water heater bracing, or CO detector. It's a $100 fine. Now, how's the government ever going to find out? Well, they're not unless you invite them in. Why would you want to do that? But that's the law, right? That's the law. So the seller has to have those things installed within 7 days, right? If they're not installed, what happens with your appraiser? Well, they note it, and they have to come back. And when they come back to see that it was installed, they're going to send a bill, right? Paragraph 10B1 states that if the appraiser has to come back because something wasn't installed, then the seller is responsible for that revisitation. Okay? So again, who pays for the installations? That can be negotiable, but those items have to be in the property within 7 days after acceptance. And if they're not, and the appraiser has to make a revisit, any expense on that revisit will be borne by the seller. Right? Yes, ma'am.
In instances of utilities.
A little soft, a little louder, and a little slower.
In terms of utilities.
Yes.
If they're not turned on when the home inspection takes place.
They must be turned on.
So what happens there if they have to come back?
Then it would be the responsibility of the seller.
Oh, the seller.
Because the contract does state, okay, if we go back to the help. I'm blacked out. Okay. I'm blacked out. If you go back to that investigation contingency, okay? The investigation of the property, that is a contingency. The informational access to the property, that's not a contingency. So if you write a non-contingent offer, does the buyer have the ability to go in the house and measure for furniture? Yes, they do. Can that be waived? No. The only thing you waive are your contingencies. The buyer still has the right to go in and look around. Okay? So the investigation is a contingency, but the informational access, not a contingency. That is a covenant. Okay? But yes, the contract, if you look in paragraph, I want to say 12, but I think it's 8C, it does actually say that all utilities are to be left on. Because you can't investigate or have informational access if you don't have utilities. Okay.
Paragraph 13?
Look at paragraph 8C and paragraph 12. Okay. Okay. But yes, it's in there. It's in there. Okay. Okay. Let me go through. Where are we now? Buyer loan status. So this is going to be paragraph 5C. I already mentioned that earlier. Well, let me go back quick. Remember I said allocation of cost between buyer and seller? That's all in paragraph Q. So you'll see here in the fourth column, we have boxes for buyer, seller, or both. So you just check which one you want, and it's buyer, seller, or both. If you check both, then it will be done equally. Now, some of you might say, well, I don't understand this escrow thing. We've got buyer, seller, both, each to pay their own. What the heck's going on there? Well, in a transaction where the buyer's getting a loan, you actually have two escrows, right? Because you have the loan escrow and you have the sale escrow. You have the loan escrow between the borrower and the lender. You have the sale escrow between the buyer and the seller, right? So there's actually two escrows going on. Because you refinance your house, you've got an escrow, right? Each to pay their own is where buyer and seller will split the sale cost of escrow, but the buyer is responsible for the loan cost of escrow. Why do we have buyer, seller, and both? And I think there was somewhat of a discussion in the Standard Forms Committee, and that's the compromise they came up with. I'm not on that committee, and they don't listen to me anyway. So, but anyway, that's what that means. All right. So if we go now to paragraph 5. C, okay. Little 3, buyer's loan status. Okay. In paragraph 5, C3, here's where the buyer authorizes the seller to verify what's going on with the buyer's loan. Okay. So no more closed door. Do you get the credit score? No. Okay. But you can talk to them. Okay, what do you got? Have you been pre-approved? Have they been pre-qualified? What's their status? Where is their loan? Has the appraisal been ordered? Has the appraisal come back yet? So the listing agent, the seller's agent can verify. Would I have the seller do that? Probably not, because I'm not sure the seller would understand what's being told to them, particularly if they're getting a lot of smoke from the lender, which sometimes happens. But you, the agent, are going to be able to ascertain whether things are going legitimately over there with that loan. All right. So anyway, that's buyer's loan status. The next one I want to talk about is paragraph 11. And paragraph 11 deals with I know I'm jumping through here. NHE, TDS, other things, and if we go to the top of the next page, C, so we're on page 8, paragraph 11C, the issue of, where am I? Home hardening and defensible space. Okay, so as we go north of here, closer to the San Gabriel Mountains, we go into areas that are prone to fires. Okay, and fires are a real thing in Southern California these days. Okay, so CAR came up with a new form last June to deal with fire hardening and defensible space. It is a mandatory disclosure if the property is applicable. Okay, a lot of properties are not applicable. So what triggers this new disclosure? 3 things, and you actually have to have all 3 things. So first of all, you have a property that was built before January 1st, 2010. So the property was built before 2010. Building codes were changed for properties built after 2010, so this disclosure only applies to properties built before 2010. Second, the seller has to give a TDS. The seller is exempt from a TDS, doesn't apply. And third, in your NHD report, the property is listed as being in a high fire or severe fire zone. So it's in a fire zone in the NHD report. The seller is giving a TDS because they have to, and the property was built prior to 2010. If all three of those things apply, then you have to include this FHDS form for fire hardening and defensible space. So what's fire hardening? Well, the biggest danger of wildfires are embers. Those embers would travel maybe a quarter of a mile. And let me give you an example. One of the questions in this disclosure form is, are your rain gutters covered? You see, if your rain gutters are not covered, they may have leaves, dried leaves in them. These embers hit these leaves, they start a fire, that gets into the roof, and now the house is on fire. Okay? So I use that because that's an example I think we can all relate to. I guess now all gutters today have to be covered. I've not seen a gutter put in recently, but I guess they are covered. Okay. So fire hardening is the structure is constructed or retrofitted to make it more resistant to an oncoming fire. Defensible space means that combustible vegetation is further enough away from the house to give firefighters an opportunity to get in there and protect the house from the fire. Okay? So these two things are triggered by houses built prior to 2010, TDS, in a fire zone. Well, what if you only have two of them? Or one of them? Or what if you just think, oh, geez, there could be a fire here, but we don't have any of the three? Should I do this FHDS? Well, if you look at it, it's a bear. The only form worse than the FHDS to try to figure out is the COP, contingent of purchase for the buyer. If you haven't seen it since it's been rewritten, it's nasty to read through, okay? So they're really hard forms to read, right? My recommendation, with the consent of your broker and manager, is if you don't have all three, which means you're not required to give the FHDS form, look at that wildfire advisory. Because that wildfire advisory does a really good job of advising the buyer of the dangers of wildfires. The problem with the FHDS is they ask you to talk to your local government official about the requirements and inspections, and most of the local governments here haven't set that up yet. It makes it very frustrating. So if you have to use the FHDS, then you use it. But if you don't have to use it, but you're a little concerned about wildfires, particularly as you go north of the 210, think about that wildfire advisory. And that's actually explained up here in paragraph 4, if I can go back to paragraph 4. Paragraph 4, C, third item down, Wildfire Disaster Advisory, WDFA. WDFA. It's a nice form for alerting buyers to the potential of a possible fire hazard from outside the property. All right? Okay, the next item goes to 11G, and we kind of talked about this, so I'll go over it very quickly. Termination rights. So earlier I talked about contingencies. You release all contingencies. Can the buyer still escape? Yes, they can. They still have their statutory cancellation rights. And what a paragraph 11G talks about is those cancellation rights. They cannot be waived. They cannot be released in advance. You see, when the legislature enacted Civil Code 1102, which requires the TDS, they wanted agents to give that TDS, or sellers to give that TDS to the buyer before they wrote the offer. Well, we know in practice that almost never happens. We always give the documents to the buyer after they're in escrow. So to penalize agents and the seller for not giving the TDS in advance, they decided to give the buyer a cancellation right of 3 days or 5 days by mail in escrow. And that's why it's there. So there is no way a buyer can release that cancellation right. I mean, the legislative intent was to specifically give the buyer that right to cancel, almost as a penalty against the seller for not giving it to him in advance. Now, as the MLS develops and technology improves, I foresee the day where the TDS may actually be uploaded into the MLS. And when you go into the MLS and you click on it, it's there, and you can send it to your buyer through DocuSign, and they can initial, so you can make an offer. If the buyer has already received the TDS before they make the offer, then they have no cancellation rights because they already received it. So the cancellation only is after you've gone into acceptance, then you get the TDS. That's what triggers the cancellation. But if you get the TDS before you make the offer, then you don't have cancellation for the receipt of that document because you got it before you made the offer, right? Kind of makes sense. All right. 25I, and now we're going to get into days. Takes me a while to get into 25I. No changes to paragraph 14, okay? Except that 2-day notice to perform, it is a 2-day notice to perform. In the old contract, you could change it to a 3-day notice or something. It's a 2-day notice to perform. They don't give you, that's I think the only time frame, or one of the few time frames, that you don't have the ability to tweak. It's a 2-day notice, all right? But in the definitions, all good kinds of stuff in definitions. But I want to focus on paragraph 25I and 25K. So 25I, there on page 13 of the contract, or almost towards the end of your handout, deals with counting days. So as I mentioned before, unless it's the deposit going to escrow, which is business days, everything else is calendar days. Right? So today is day 0. Tomorrow is always day 1. Right? And we count calendar days from tomorrow. So tomorrow is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would be day 7, etc., right? Those are counting days. Now, we know in the contract we've got set deadlines that can be changed. We got the 2 days, which can't be changed. We got 3 days for the amount of time seller has to request CC&Rs after acceptance. That's 3 days. We have 5 days when escrow sends escrow instructions out to the buyer and seller. Upon receipt, they've got 5 days to sign those and send them back. We have 7 days. That's how long seller has to deliver all their documents to the buyer. We have 17 days. That's how long buyer has to release their contingencies. Okay. The loan contingency, I think you all know, has been changed from 21 days to 17 days. I think 2 reasons for that. One, under the old contract, you were giving 1 notice to perform on the inspection contingencies on the 15th, 16th, 17th day, because you can give it 2 days early. But then you were giving another notice to perform on the loan contingency on the 19th, 20th, 21st day, right? So you had to do 2, so I think CIR said, if we just make it 1, then you just have to give 1 notice to perform. The other thing, as we talked about earlier, with the pre-approval or fully underwritten pre-approval, hopefully our buyer has started at least the preliminary loan process, so they really don't need 21 days, they can do it in 17. See, I think the business is changing. We are going to be showing buyers now, or showing properties to more qualified buyers. Remember under those COVID documents, we were supposed to have our buyer pre-approved or pre-qualified, and they were supposed to look at the property online first before we actually showed them the property. Well, as we come out of COVID, hopefully we will be following in that practice, and we will be showing more qualified buyer properties, which actually is going to save you wear and tear in your car, because you're not going to show them as many properties because they're more qualified, right? But anyway, as we do the counting of the days, that 7th day, that 17th day, we call that the scheduled performance day. Okay? That's the day performance is supposed to occur. However, if that day is a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, we roll to the next business day. Because if one of the parties, buyer or seller, is a corporation, then they don't necessarily have the ability to perform on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday because they're closed, right? And you can't really treat legal persons, corporations, differently from natural persons, you and I. So if the last day to perform, the scheduled performance day, is a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, then it rolls over to the next business day. And that next business day is known as the allowable performance day. That makes sense, right? Scheduled performance day, allowable performance day. So when do you give the notice to perform, that 2-day notice? Do you give it 2 days before the scheduled performance day or before the allowable performance day? Scheduled performance day, okay? So if it's the 17th day, you give it to them you can give it to them to 2 days before the 17th day. So if the 17th day is a Saturday, you can give them a notice to perform as early as Thursday. Yeah, but they don't have to perform until Monday. Okay. You give the 2-day notice based on the scheduled performance day, not the day they actually. But they still don't actually have to perform until Monday or Tuesday if Monday's a holiday, right? That all kinds of makes sense, but you know you're going to be out there and you're going to have transactions or agents are going to fight you over that. You just have to say, look, go to 25I. And this is so funny. I was listening to a program from CAR Legal, and they said, we've explained it so clearly here. Well, they explained it. This is not clear. I had to read it like 3 times. Okay? And I am a lawyer. Okay? So it's not an easy read, but it is what I just told you. Now, the next one, which I think is probably the most entertaining, is 25K. And 25K deals with delivery. Now, we know we always have challenges with delivery. How can we deliver the thing to the person? We can't find out where they are. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, if we can jump ahead to the very last page. The very last page, after liquidated damages, after offer, after acceptance, very last page, page 16, the real estate brokers section. You will find a new space here under the signatures, and it's entitled Designated Electronic Delivery Addresses, both for the agent representing the buyer and the agent representing the seller. And under here you will have email and then alternate. And they also have a place for a text number. Ooh, I don't like notices going by text. I like email. Okay. So, you, the agent representing the buyer, will put your email address here, and if you put your email address here, all the listing agent has to do, or the seller has to do, is email notifications, disclosures, documents to you, and as soon as they hit send, it has been delivered. You're saying, but I'm not checking my email today. You start. It's time to start, right? Get that app on your phone because delivery will occur after that sent thing goes, because the sender is going to have proof that they sent the delivery to the address you put there. Now, the one exception, and this goes back to 25K, deals with links. Let's say I send you something, but I put all of my documents in a link, and you can't access the link. Or you have religious objections to links, whatever. You can object to the link. You have 3 days to refuse the link. So you can reply to me and say, I'm sorry, Ed, but I do not accept links. Or you can say, I don't look, can't access the link, whatever. Which means I have to send it back to you as attachments. Can you refuse the attachments? No. You've got to accept the attachments. The only thing you can refuse are links, but you have 3 days to refuse the links. All right? So hopefully this will speed it up. This alternate place, that is for your TC. So if you're utilizing a TC and they receive all of your disclosures and documents and everything and you want to have it go to them, you can put that, and then you can check this box to make the alternative being the only delivery address. So you're not going to get the stuff that's going to go to your alternative. Maybe it's a second email, or maybe it's your TC or somebody else, but you can do that. Okay. So hopefully that's going to speed the process up. I'm sure we're going to get some objections, but nothing's more frustrating when you're trying to get documents to the other side and you're not hearing back from them. Now all you have is the proof that you sent it. That email address is the same as they put here. You're good. You must have questions. Liquidated damages, arbitration, mediation. Questions? Well, come on, you were so good going through, and I was worried I was going to run over time. That's all I got. We're so much longer. Yeah, two days ago when I did it another off, I got more questions. So, any questions on the purchase agreement? Yes?
Actually, did you hear? Oh, actually, in reference to our files, for example, if you represent the seller and the buyer's agents are returning all your documentation, can we show proof by way of email that you just mentioned? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's always
You see?
before somebody do something, as long as you requested it.
Yeah.
We type the emails and that's
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
See, here's the deal. When you send something, you go into your sent column, you will see the address you sent it to. If it's the same address, they put it there. Yeah. Now, if it bounces back, they put the wrong email address there. That doesn't look good at all. So it's very important when you write your offer that you put your correct email address. Get your own email address right. Hopefully all of you are using the templates, right? So after this class, you're going to go into a template. You're going to create one for your buyers, one for your sellers, and you're going to fill in all the standard stuff that you always do. That way, when it comes time to write an offer, all you have to do is go in there and copy it from your template into your transaction, and all your pre-filled material is all done. So you can literally write an offer in 15 minutes, and you can even go to other stuff. I mean, if you like to use, and hopefully you like to use Legacy First, right, in your offer, you can just put in Legacy First as your escrow company and just make it part of your template. You can do the same with your title, your home warranty, your lender. You can do all of that. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on the Avid for the buyers. Okay, if you start off saying you had an offer and you used that Avid, can you still use it for other offers and that date, keep the date? Does that expire? Say 6 months down the line, you finally get an offer accepted.
Oh, you mean you're representing the seller?
No, the buyer. For the buyers that.
But the Avid is for each property.
The disclosure. I'm sorry, the disclosure.
Agency disclosure. Okay, I was trying to go, gosh, what am I talking about? Okay.
For the agency disclosure, can you use that same agency disclosure through all your offers that you've written?
Yes, as long as there's no cessation or termination of representation.
Okay.
So this is how I would do it. I'm going to take you out and start looking at properties, okay? And then after a couple of days, you say, Ed, I just can't deal with this anymore. I need to take a break. So, okay, call me when you change your mind. Then a week later, you change your mind. So let's go out again. I'm ready to go. I have to do a new AD with you. And I think I need to do a new PRBS with you. Because I was your agent, and then for a week I wasn't your agent, and now I'm your agent again. However, I take this gentleman out, and he cannot make up his mind. And I spend 8 months showing him property. Can I use the one AD and the one PRBS? Yes, because I've been constantly representing him. So it's not necessarily time, it's do you quit representation and then start representation again. If you stop representing him and then start up again, I would generate a new AD form and a new PRBS form, okay? But as long as representation is ongoing, I think you're fine. I think you're fine. Yes?
I have a two-part question regarding terms on the MLS entry.
Okay.
Things that are left out in the contract, for example, one would be contingency on the seller, so they're finding a replacement property.
Okay.
If it states in the comments that it's contingent on the seller finding a replacement property, but it's never delivered a form in the contract, and it cancels, what stands, like what supersedes?
Okay. The MLS is not a contract for buyers and sellers. It is a contract for you. What I mean by that is, yes, it is a marketing tool to display listings, but it also creates a unilateral contractual obligation between the listing agent and the selling agent to share a commission. So it's a contract for licensees who are members of the MLS. It is not a contract between buyers and sellers. But it is a disclosure. And this is where you can run into problems with the MLS. So let's say I put in the MLS that the portable spa or the above ground spa is included, but I don't put it in the purchase agreement. So under the contract, it's not included. And if you determine, or if it is determined that that spa is personal property, then the seller can remove it. Of course, I don't really know whether a spa is personal property or not, because although, well, first of all, it is hardwired in, and typically requires a building permit because you have to get an electrical permit because there needs to be a multi-breaker switch 5 feet from the spa under the building code. So if there's a short, you don't electrocute everybody in the spa, right? So that's sounding a lot like a chandelier, or even more than a chandelier. But stepping over there, here's the problem. This MLS says spa included. I write an offer on your listing. I don't put it in my offer. Seller accepts, close of escrow, seller takes the spa, and the buyer's saying, where's my spa? It says right here in the MLS that there's no spa. Now, in paragraph 9 of the purchase agreement, it says things as listed in the MLS as included or excluded are not included or excluded unless it states that in the contract. So the buyer takes you to small claims court. And there's Judge Judy, because she's a lot nastier than Judge Wapner or Judge Brown, right? So I'm going to pick the nastiest one. Judge Judy is going to say, listing agent, you said the spa was included. And it's not. That's a misrepresentation. Buyer's agent, you missed it. Why didn't you put it in the contract? It says right there in 9A to rectify it. You're incompetent. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have the seller, the seller, the listing agent, and the buyer's agent pay for a new spa for this buyer based on an equity principle. And that's what small claims court judges are doing. So even though CIR has that language, things included or not included in the MLS or not included or not stated, that's not, the small claims court judge says, I don't care what CIR says. This is what I'm going to do. And consistently they've done that. And they've got a good argument because the MLS is a representation. So if you're writing an offer for a buyer, this is the one area where I say it's better to write more in your offer than less. You want to add, and we can go back to, anyway, paragraph 3P has items included, and it's a huge list of boxes that you can check to include things. And then P2 has any items you want to exclude. I always get a kick out of that because pre-clicked in paragraph 3P1 are bathroom mirrors. Oops, here it is. I guess there's a real problem with sellers removing the bathroom mirror, so they pre-clicked it. But again, this pretty much includes everything. If you go into paragraph 9, they do give you that laundry list of things that are absolutely included. And included in that is things accessible from the cloud. So if you have a smart home, the technology to access the cloud is now included. So the seller needs to give those access points anything that's exclusive to the house. So you don't have to leave your Alexa. You can take your Alexa with you, you can take your cell phone with you. But if you have any other equipment in the house whose only purpose is to enable this home to connect with the cloud so that it is a smart home, then that has to be included, including smart light bulbs. So, the light bulbs where you say, Alexa, turn on the lights. And the light bulbs know to turn on the lights because they're connected with Alexa. Those have to be included. Matter of fact, all light bulbs have to be included. I guess people were taking out their light bulbs. So light bulbs are now considered to be real property. Okay? So if the buyer thinks or wants something like swing sets, gazebos, spas, the storage shed, whatever, include it right here in paragraph 9. And if you need more room, then add that CIR addendum there in paragraph 4. Check the box, add the addendum, and add anything you want there. Okay? Other questions? Okay, what questions are you getting?
That was excellent.
You got it?
That was absolutely
Okay.
excellent. I love that.
Okay. I just have a feeling people are going to have more comments, so I'm just going to hang around. If you have any other comments, please come on up and talk to me. Thank you very much, and you've been a great audience. Thank you.